So we're talking with Kshama Sawant, and you're running for city council in Seattle as a socialist. And what's interesting about that is that you actually have a chance to win. You know, you got more votes than the mayor in the primary, and yesterday you made the cover of the Stranger. And so, first off, I just want to start off by asking you what made you run for city council.
So I'm a member of a nationwide activist organization called Socialist Alternative, and we are an organization of social and economic justice activists, and we've been involved in a lot of campaigns, including we are sitting right here in Seattle, and we had the anti-WTO protest movement in 1999, and that's one of the movements we've been involved in. More recently, we were part of the Occupy movement in Seattle and in New York, and we're also part of the Occupy Homes Minnesota campaign, and mostly in Minneapolis. And so we have a long history of activism, and I was personally quite integral to the Occupy Seattle movement here. And it's interesting that we are sitting here at Bills off Broadway. It's just across, diagonally opposite my school, Seattle Central Community College, where I teach, and that's where the Occupy Seattle encampment was brought. And I think that was quite a historic moment how the movement was able to achieve that. And I think after that, during the presidential election year last year, we were trying to understand what is it that we can do in order to politically engage a larger group of people. We thought Occupy was a tremendous beginning, and we need to take the movement even farther. And we know that the anger that was expressed by the Occupy movement against the blatant inequality in our, this is a capitalist system, and the blatant inequality that results from capitalism and the way government is run under capitalism, and the outrageous way in which financial institutions, the hedge fund owners, they precipitated the economic collapse, and then they were the ones who were rewarded. And in fact, I'm sitting right here with a very recent article from the New York Times, which, this is from the Seattle Times, but it's reproduced from the New York Times, which is the updated study, the famous study from Piketty and Saez from UC Berkeley, which shows just the stark income and wealth inequality in this country. And this is, I just wanted to read you a couple of statistics because that sort of shows the significance of our campaign, which is that since the recession officially ended, the 1%, the top 1%, has captured about 95% of the income gains in this economy. And the richest 10% of households own about 90% of all of the stock. And so, what's really happening here is that you have two economies. You have an economy that works for the super wealthy, for the CEOs, for the bosses, for the big corporations like McDonald's and Walmart. And you have another economy where the 99% of the population, working people, the elderly, the disabled, young students, children, are not only not gaining from the economy, but are losing out steadily since the recession began in 2008. This has been a long, decades-long process, and now it is becoming even more clear to people that most of us are not gaining. And that's the spirit behind which we ran this campaign this year, and also the campaign last year for the State House of Representatives. It's clear for anybody to see that Seattle has become an unaffordable place to live for the majority. What we see is the proliferation of low-wage jobs. Most people are stuck in jobs that don't pay nearly enough for their basic standard of living. We're not talking about having the luxuries and all those frills on top of that. We're talking about, do households have the ability to pay their rent? Do they have the ability to afford health care, education for their children, food for their families? And we're seeing the majority of working people steadily going towards the bottom. And it's also important to see what's happening in terms of housing. Seattle is facing a crisis of affordable housing, and the reason is not simply that well, there's lots of demand and that's why prices are going up, which is what a traditional economist will tell you. But the reality is that rents are skyrocketing here because real estate corporations are taking over the land and the buildings, the rental units in the city. And the reason that is happening is that we have a city government, especially city council members, who are facilitating that process. And we are running against Richard Conlon. Our opponent, Conlon, is a 16-year incumbent of the city council, and he has overseen this whole process of major land giveaway to real estate corporations, to billionaire developers like Paul Allen, who controls a lot of the land in this city. And we're seeing ordinary people being pushed out of the city and having to live on the outskirts, and they have jobs here, so they have long commutes. They don't have transit. Transit is deteriorating steadily. And so if you look at every angle of how you measure the standard of living, you look at wages, you look at housing costs, you look at healthcare costs, you look at transit, you look at social services, you look at what's available for infants and children, what's available for people of color, steadily there is a huge decline. And there is nobody in city government right now that has any sense of urgency about it. And that is why we're running, because we want people themselves to feel empowered, to say that, this government is not working for us, and we need our own voice in city government. We need our own voices in city council. And the success of this campaign will be a huge step forward for that, to have working people's voice in city government so that our concerns get a hearing. Our concerns are not getting virtually any hearing, and the overwhelming majority of policymaking is in favor of wealthy and big business, and we need a huge shift away from that.
I remember when Richard Conlon got elected to office, and I remember walking from the AFL-CIO rally at the WTO downtown with Richard, marching downtown into what became the mayhem later on. And I remember that Richard Conlon was at just about every single one of those meetings, prior to the WTO, all these teach-ins about globalization, and I remember that Richard Conlon ran as a Green. But then you look at Richard Conlon's record in particular, and he's supporting all the developers and all the big projects, which were exactly the opposite of what the people voted for. We all voted for a monorail. 3 times what happened to our monorail. We voted against the tunnel, and they got the Deep 4 tunnel anyway, And so, how do you go up against that? That's because of the money, And so how do you feel like you could make a difference, in that environment?
So I think the point you made about, what happens when these politicians get into office, the first time they're running, they have all the right progressive rhetoric to go with their campaigning, and then they get into office, and then you see them doing exactly the opposite. Their whole policy-making record is in deep contradiction to what they claim to stand for. And I think the way you frame the question is exactly the way I would frame it. The point is that if we have a political system that relies on an individual's good intentions in order for the city government to actually work for ordinary people, for tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of ordinary people, then that's a very weak system, and that is a problem that we're facing with, as long as progressives, as long as left-leaning people have this illusion that the Democratic Party is going to do the right thing, we're going to be in this situation. I mean, the point is not that there is not a difference between Democrats and Republicans. Of course, there's a difference between Democrats and Republicans. And as a socialist, I'm at the opposite end of the spectrum from the Republicans. But the problem is not that. The problem is, progressives are clear about the role of the Republican Party. What they are not clear about is the role of the Democratic Party. And therein lies the problem. And so the only solution to the kind of political status quo we see is for working people, for the labor movement, for the youth, and elderly and everybody else who has an interest in social and economic justice. We have to open our eyes and understand that this system of two parties is not working for us, and we need our own grassroots political alternative. And that's why one of the things Socialist Alternative is advocating for is a mass party for working people, where we decide, we reject the corporate agenda of both parties and say, no, we need political representation for ourselves. And it's very striking, this whole thinking about, what kind of strategy should we have, what kind of approach should we have to actually make social change, is especially striking in this city of Seattle, because this is a one-party city. We don't have Republican ideology to speak of. If you look at the opinion polls of the majority of the people in the city, it is very, very progressive, very, very left-leaning. But what you have in the city council and the mayor's office, you have, for decades, you've had people there, politicians there, who are well to the right of majority opinion in Seattle. Why is it that in a city that is controlled by the Democratic Party, you are seeing this steady decline of living standards of ordinary people? I mean, they're supposed to stand for the little guy, right? But this shows you that they don't. So we have a lot of well-meaning people who, we are very sympathetic to them, but what we tell them is that, look, this strategy of supporting the Democratic Party and their figureheads is not working for us. We need to break out of that, and we need independent candidates to come out of the grassroots, just like myself. I mean, I come out of this whole idea that, activists and young people and, people who are not benefiting from the system, to create our own voice, and that is the only way this can change. And if you look at Conlon's record, Conlon's rhetoric is one thing, but if you look at his record, he was the only council member who voted against paid sick leave for Seattle's workers. I would say that that vote alone requires him to be shown the door and for a new voice to be put on city council. Because there is no better, no clearer example of a proposed legislation that was actually going to be extremely beneficial for working people in Seattle. Imagine, a city in the 21st century not having paid sick leave for its most exploited workers. That was a big step forward, but Conlon voted against it. And this is where we have to recognize that we cannot rely on people who say that they're going to stand by you, but then if you look at their funding sources, if you look at Conlon's funding sources, it's a veritable who's who of big developers, wealthy, lawyers and real estate owners and landowners, and we have to recognize that that is a failed strategy, and we have to break out of that.
Why are you getting all this media attention, and how does that happen?
I think that is happening precisely because people want to hear this voice and they don't get to hear it. It hasn't happened for decades and decades. It hasn't happened that you have a political voice running for office, running an electoral campaign, where people are hearing what they actually want to hear. I mean, what happens when you talk to most people, and not just in Seattle, but anywhere in this country, when you ask them about politics, a lot of people, especially young people, will tell you, I don't care because I don't know what these guys are talking about. They just seem out of touch to me. They're not talking about what is affecting my life and the lives of my community. When was the last time there was a conversation about poverty and inequality? If you look at the presidential debates in 2012, they were sham debates that did not even mention the most critical issues that people care about. I don't know how many times the words poverty, inequality, climate change, sustainability, low-wage jobs. I mean, somebody can go and do research, but I would be extremely surprised to find out that they were mentioned even once, you know, maybe a few times. So I think the excitement of this campaign and the attention it is getting is because this is the only race. I mean, there are many local races this year in Seattle. This is the only race in which, for voters, for people who want to get politically engaged, there is a clear choice. You want 4 more years of status quo? Your choice is Mr. Conlin. It's very clear. But if you want a change, it is so clear that this one time, we actually have a voice that is advocating for working people. And what is really refreshing, what is a breath of fresh air for people, is that you finally have a political voice which has absolutely no ties to big business or the interests of the wealthy. We are unabashedly, unapologetically pro-worker, pro-working people, and pro-environment campaign. This has not happened in decades, where people can see that, yes, this is a clear choice for us. And that is why this campaign is getting attention. And you're right, we just got on the cover of The Stranger this week. And also, we had this recent, really excellent series of debates at the Garfield High School, on social justice issues. The questions were spot on about homelessness, about domestic violence, about issues that affect people of color. You had a lot of really important questions being discussed. And if you look at how the debates were organized, we have a mayoral race this year. And traditionally, the mayoral race gets all the media attention. But this year, this race is getting most of the media attention precisely because there is no other race, including the mayoral race, there is no race that shows you such a sharp contrast between two political voices, and that is what is striking to people.
Well, it's not like he's not giving voice to these issues, because he did run as a Green, and I went down to videotape Vandana Shiva last week, and that was a Yes Magazine event, and he's on the board of Yes Magazine, with David Corton and all these people. So Richard Conlin is in all the right places, and he comes from the Sierra Club. But even the Sierra Club, it's just a lukewarm endorsement because he doesn't always vote, with the environmental agenda, right? So what I think is happening here is a rebellion. The people are smart enough in Seattle to know that what people say is not really what counts. It's what they do. I just happen to know that you're an economist. You teach economics, and most of the universities, they're teaching the Chicago School economics and neoliberalism and all that. And somehow you came out to be a socialist. And so I'm kind of curious how that happened, and what your idea of socialism is, because the thing is, the things that you're advocating for are not really out of the mainstream.
So just very quickly about the really, the apt comments you made about how Conlin is, he's not exactly your traditional right winger. He comes out of Yes Magazine, and he has had the support of the Sierra Club. But as you said, now it's a lukewarm support because they can see that he's not actually standing up for the things that they believe in, which is genuine environmental sustainability. And really, I think that is a very, very important thing for us to spend a couple of minutes on, because the reality is that Seattle is a very, very progressive city. So for any politician to have any traction with voters, they have to sound progressive. So he has no choice but to sound progressive. But what he does is, what many city council members do, not all, but many, which is, say all the, right-sounding things and be very vague about it, not make actual promises, and then go ahead and carry out your agenda. I mean, you mentioned the tunnel earlier. He sold, if you remember his words about the tunnel, he was trying to sell it as the green alternative. I mean, I cannot think of something more blatantly dishonest in relation to environmental discussions. It was the most, nobody with any honest loyalty to the idea of environmental sustainability would support the tunnel, because it is the opposite of sustainable. It is actually it's going to be quite horribly, have negative impacts on the environment, not to mention the fact that it totally puts the kibosh on any kind of transit-oriented development on that. I mean, what we needed is a surface highway which was geared towards transit and a massive expansion of transit. But if you look at Conlon's record, he's actually stymied many attempts to expand transit issues, and he really was willing to put the democratic process aside to push through the tunnel. But when it comes to second Montlake Bridge, which would actually be for transit and pedestrians and bicyclists, he's hemming and hawing and saying, well, we need to think about cost effectiveness. Well, the Montlake Bridge is probably going to cost $100 million, but the tunnel is going to cost $4.2 billion of taxpayer money. He has no hesitation in spending our money because the Downtown Business Association, who are some of his main backers, they are pushing for it. So if you want to know why certain people like Conlon, who have a progressive, rhetoric, but they do the exact opposite thing, and why do they do that? It is not a mystery. Follow the money. Look where he gets his backing, and look where he thinks his loyalty stands. And so we have to completely break out of that. And in terms of, the fact that a socialist campaign is gaining ground, and why this campaign is getting an echo from people, and he also said that, well, the issues we're raising are not out of the mainstream. And yes, there is truth to that. The idea of a $15 an hour minimum wage is now gaining national ground. Most people who are, as a matter of fact, making less than $15 an hour will tell you, of course, you're asking me, do I want $15 an hour? Of course I want $15 an hour. Of course I want publicly funded healthcare. Of course I want affordable housing. Of course I want my children to go to fully funded, good quality public schools. So in the sense that the majority of people who are not benefiting from the system support the points we are raising, of course that is absolutely correct. It's not outside the mainstream. In fact, the city council is completely outside the mainstream. They are completely out of touch with what the majority needs and what the majority wants and what the majority's political opinions are. They're completely out of touch with that. So in fact, the interesting thing is the Seattle Times, which is the conservative mouthpiece of the city, said that I was too hard left for Seattle. No, the reality is that they are too conservative and out of touch with Seattle views. But and so from that standpoint, you're completely correct that the points we are raising are not outside the mainstream. But what is completely outside mainstream politics and corporate politics is that in order to actually be an effective voice for fighting for $15 an hour, rent control, a tax on millionaires, any of these points we're talking about, you need to have clarity that the only way you can do that is to defy the interests of big business. Have no ties with big business. Be openly defiant of that and openly in support of and advocating for working people. You don't see that clarity anywhere else, and that clarity has everything to do with the fact that I'm a socialist and that we are a socialist organization. We have no, all our loyalty lies towards working people. We have nothing to gain from big business. We don't take any money from big business. Our campaign is completely funded by grassroots donations, and I have also pledged that if I'm elected to city council, I will take only the average worker's wage. Do you know how much the city council members take today? They get $120,000 apiece. And that is second only to the city of LA. And so the question Seattle voters should be asking is, do you think your council members are doing the second best job in the country? And do you think they deserve to be paid that much? While the rest of us are struggling with low wages. I'm the only candidate that has pledged that if I'm elected, I will take home only the average worker's salary, and the rest will be put into building social justice movements. And what kind of movements will they be? I mean, you look at UFCW 21, it's preparing to go on strike. When workers go on strike, they need tremendous support, emotional and financial and political support from the community. And that is a great example of where taxpayer funds can be used, to actually support working people, to help them in their struggles against exploitation, to fight for their rights. And that's the kind of shift people are seeing through our campaign. And it's not coincidental that we are socialists. It's precisely because we're socialists that we raise this. And what socialism means to me is a recognition that we have to fight for every reform that we can. And so by reforms, we're talking about an increase in minimum wage, making the tax system progressive. We are sitting in a state which has liberal credentials, but which has the most regressive tax system in the entire nation. So there is no question that we have an urgent need to completely reverse that situation and make the tax system progressive. We need funding for public schools. We need universal single-payer health care. We need to fight for all these reforms. We need to fight against police brutality, especially the systematic targeting of people of color and low-income people and the homeless people. We have to fight for all of this. But what makes me a socialist, well, first of all, is that I recognize the forces that are arrayed against us. So if we want to get $15 an hour, the only way we can get it is through mass movements of workers and big workplace actions in order to demand for that. You're not going to get that simply by electing me to city council, although electing me to city council is going to be a huge step forward because you will have a strong voice to bring people into the fold and to actually take that movement forward. But we've made it very clear from the very beginning that in addition to electing socialists to city council, we also need mass movements on the streets and in the workplaces. And that's one thing that defines our politics, that we recognize what we are up against and the fact that you have to pick a side. There is, Sally Bagshaw, one of the city council members, who's also up for election this year. I heard that she said recently in that debate at Garfield, she said that, well, it doesn't matter whether you're rich or poor, we can all work on this together. She's either being naive or she's being dishonest because that's not the way it works. There are two economies. Under capitalism, there is a section of the population that benefits. There is another majority, the 99%, that does not benefit. And we have to be clear which side we are on. And what sets me apart is that I'm honest about that. I say that, no, my loyalty lies with working people. I have zero loyalty to big business and CEOs of McDonald's and Subway and so on who are firing their workers for political activism. And we need more people who are cut from this cloth, not from the cloth of the status quo. And the most important thing that sets us apart and makes us socialists is that we recognize that while we are fighting for each of those reforms, we also have to recognize and we have to help people recognize that fighting for reforms is not going to be enough. Every reform that the labor movement and social movements fought for is now under attack. And so as long as we are living under capitalism, we will always be fighting for reforms. And the only way to actually bring about a fundamental social and economic shift away from inequality and poverty is to completely change the way the economy is reorganized. And that will involve not only fighting for a higher minimum wage, but it will require workers, working people, and the labor movement to take democratic control of their own workplaces and run them themselves, and and go towards a system that is not the goal. Go towards a system whose goal is not profit maximizing for a tiny elite, but a greater social good. And so it's not good enough to simply have good intentions about social good. We have to recognize that as long as capitalism exists, there will be massive poverty. There will be massive inequality. And if this video is reaching people who are outside of Seattle, in the US or internationally, look at global poverty. There is no solution to global poverty unless there is a fundamental shift away from the capitalist system, because it's a system itself that generates this poverty. No matter how many non-profit or well-intentioned efforts we have, we need all of that under capitalism. But unless we have people fighting for a fundamental shift, we're not going to be able to solve these problems.
Recently, new figures have come out showing that wealth disparity in the United States is at its highest point now since 1927, which was just before the stock market crash, right? And this is what always happens. And, we had a period of reform there under Roosevelt, but Roosevelt left all the filthy rich where they were. And so they dismantled all of the New Deal. And so now, look where we are now. We're back to where we were in 1927. And wealth disparity is one of the worst things that you can do to a country. It is the worst thing, except for bomb them to smithereens. All the social indices go down. So how do you propose getting out of that? What's your idea? That's pretty tough. The filthy rich don't want to give up that money. So how is that going to be done?
So yeah, I mean, and just in terms of the history that you mentioned about the Roosevelt era and the New Deal, I think some of the answer to your question about how this can be done also lies in reviving the true historical lessons for the new generations. And one thing that's important to recognize is, as you correctly said, Roosevelt left the filthy rich as the filthy rich. He left them where they were, and the reality is that. Roosevelt at that time, this was, when the economy was reeling from the worst effects of the Great Depression, he said to the major business owners that I'm the best friend that capitalism has today, meaning that he recognized that he had to, as the representative of the capitalist class, he had to make some concessions in such a devastated economy to working people, to the working class, because if he didn't, then they would have a bigger revolt on their hands. But he wasn't advocating for socialism. And in fact, the only reason the New Deal happened, to whatever extent it did happen, was because there was tremendous pressure from the labor movement, from the working class, from organized labor at that time, to push for these reforms that were packaged in, under the New Deal. And in fact, Roosevelt was no friend of labor. Unfortunately, he, called the National Guard on striking workers. And so, that sort of holds a little bit of the lesson that we need to take in to understand, okay, how are we going to make this change? If you're listening to this and if you agree that, yes, capitalism is not working for the rest of us and we need to make a change, how do we do that? Then in the first place, we have to organize mass movements, not only on the streets, but in the workplaces, because, yes, as you said, the rich are not going to agree with you. So don't hold your breath. It's not a question of asking Bill Gates or Paul Allen or Warren Buffett. It's not a question of asking them nicely. It's not a question of asking the CEO of Walmart, can you please give us a little more? It doesn't work that way. They're not going to agree with you. But the good news is that we have the majority of people on our side. What we need to do is get organized. And what does that mean? That means that wherever we are, we have to have a cohesive effort to push for reforms wherever we are. Like, for $15 an hour, that is catching momentum in Seattle. Well, what we need is the next step, which is get a socialist and city council, organize mass movements on the streets in Seattle, have workers in their own workplaces organize actions that demand $15 an hour. And we need, that will need to be sustained and escalated. And we need, a really systematic and escalated series of nonviolent workplace and street actions in order to get that message through that we are not going to stop until we get this. And while we are doing that, we have to have political discussions with one another to clarify what is that we need, what is it that we need from that point onwards. And what history has shown us is that if working people are able to win demands like $15 an hour, like single-payer health care, and so on, it greatly empowers them to fight for new things. So our job is to not only be fighting for reforms, but also discussing, okay, we've won $15 an hour, what do we do next? What's the next step? We can't stop at winning a single reform or a few reforms. We have to go on. We have to go on and take the conversation towards a fundamental shift. And so that will need, huge efforts. That will need major strike actions. That will need general strikes to happen. That will need global movements to happen. And it's not that they can't happen. It's that we need to make that beginning. So the point about, the most important thing about our campaign in Seattle is that it is not a parochial issue. The question of inequality is staring us in the face everywhere around the world. The 99%, the global 99% is being pushed down. There is a global race to the bottom, and the only way to reverse that race to the bottom is to fight for reforms and fight for democratic socialism globally. And it's, in this context, I also want to point out that Socialist Alternative is part of an international movement, and we don't have just a local vision. We fight hard in local movements, but we have a national and international outlook, and our sister organizations are fighting for social and economic justice and organizing workers in countries as distant as South Africa and Ireland. We have our sister organizations in Russia fighting against the attacks on the LGBTQ community. We have our movements in India and Pakistan and many countries in Europe. We have them in Latin America. So we need the seeds of these kinds of movements to be sown everywhere, so that we can have global movements, global uprisings. That is what we're going to need. We will need students, college students in the United States refusing to pay student debt, and we need an uprising against student debt. We need no payment, no, we are not going to pay the student debt, cancel the student debt kind of movement. And the only way the question of student debt will be addressed is if students revolt against it and say, no, we're not paying. But for that, we need students everywhere, young people everywhere to be coming together. And we need that kind of solidarity. We need to have those conversations about how do we organize ourselves in order to make this happen. And I think we're living in times where this is possible. The Occupy has broken the silence, and you can see the kind of echo our campaign is getting. And I also wanted to tell you that this is not just in Seattle. Socialist Alternative is running another candidate in Minneapolis for city council. And our candidate, Ty Moore, has had long roots in Minneapolis. He is one of the activists that's been fighting against foreclosures and evictions. And you can see the ties between their movement there and our movement against foreclosures here. I was personally also arrested trying to prevent the foreclosure of one of our citizens here in Seattle, who is willing to pay, but but Wells Fargo is trying to evict him. And so our campaign in Minneapolis is really gaining ground, and we have a real shot at getting a socialist in city council there as well. And so you can see that these are glimmers of hope rising up everywhere. And what we need now is for all those people who are watching this show and passively thinking about these things to come out and be active. It's not good enough to be watching podcasts. That's the first step, of course. But you need to be doing more than that. You need to be out here talking to us, email us, get in touch with us on Facebook, find out what you can do to be involved in your own, wherever you are, or if you're in Seattle or if you're in Minneapolis, what can you do to help get Ty Moore elected? What can you do to get our campaign success here in Seattle? And that is how we make change happen.
What do you think that the city government could do to stop the foreclosures?
So obviously, if you're looking at foreclosures, and indeed, if you're looking at any economic inequality question and economic injustice question, the people you have to talk about is the big banks. They are the ones, they and the rest of the capitalist class, they are the ones who own the purse strings to the economy. And so obviously, the struggle against foreclosures has to be a national struggle. It cannot just be a city-level struggle, but the city can do a lot. First of all, one point I will make, which is almost never made by your traditional corporate politician, is that there is nothing stopping from city council members or other people in city government from publicly discussing these things. There is no law that says a city council member can't talk about inequality even if he has no jurisdiction, on it. There's no law that stops you from condemning gay bashing in Russia. There is no law that stops you from condemning the exploitation of low-income people. But you can go beyond that. For foreclosures, our campaign is calling for a city-wide moratorium on foreclosures and evictions. No more foreclosures and evictions. The city government can do that. That is possible. And if we have a genuine political voice in city council, we have to stand, stand steadfast, and we can say, okay, you can take us to court, you can take the city to court, but we are going to fight this. And the importance of making that statement, no moratorium, is not that will magically stop foreclosures. No, like I said, we are now, this is a war against the big banks, and you can't do that just by city council. But the city council taking that step to declare a moratorium and speaking out against foreclosures, that has a huge impact on political engagement. People will be inspired by that, and people will come out and join you. And that's what we need. Ultimately, if you want to stop foreclosures in Seattle, we need hundreds of thousands of people out here and saying no to foreclosures. And that will inspire people in other cities to fight against foreclosures, and so on and so forth. So, there is a domino effect. But what's missing is that initial spark. And I don't see, most of the people in city council are not going to take that step right now. And that is why it is so critical that we elect socialists like myself and Ty Moore in Minneapolis to city council, because we will do this. We will be that spark that can initiate that massive public uprising, public uproar against these blatant injustices like foreclosures. And you need a city leadership that is willing to put itself on the line. I have put myself on the line. Ty Moore has put himself on the line. We have both, he in Minneapolis and I in Seattle, have been arrested in peaceful actions against foreclosures. We need people like that. Where are those people? We know they're out there. We need them to be running for office, and we need a grassroots momentum to take over city government and run it in the interest of working people.
Currently, the banker of the state of Washington is Bank America, and there is a movement in the state legislature to have a state bank. All that interest every year goes to Bank America. Whereas, if we had a state bank, the interest could go to the state to finance some of the programs that you're talking about. So maybe you could talk a little bit about this?
Yes, absolutely. In fact, last year when we ran for the State House of Representatives, we were calling for a state bank. And this year in our city council race, we are calling for a municipal bank. If you look at who the city banks with, it's Wells Fargo. I mean, this is the notorious bank who is actually responsible for a lot of the foreclosures and evictions happening in this city. And we need the city to break away from that and to have a municipal bank. We need the state to have a state bank. And the point about this, again, as it's sort of a common theme running through all these separate issues, is that you do have people in the government right now, Democrats, who say, yes, I support a state bank. But that's not how you fight for something like that. When you are trying to push for a state bank, you're going up against you're going up directly against big banks, and they're not just going to lie down and take it. They're going to fight you. And the way they do that, the most effective way for big banks to influence, and big corporations in general to influence politics, is to do it indirectly by having their own advocates in city council and in other government. So the reality is that as long as you have people like Conlin in office who are taking money from these big businesses, from big banks, and doing their bidding, you're not going to be able to get a state bank, or a city bank or a municipal bank. So really what we need is people who are running for office who are completely broken, completely not in any alliance with the banks, and that's when it'll happen. So what the challenge that we have here is not a lack of good ideas to right the wrongs in the city. What we are lacking is somebody with a political backbone to do that, and the clarity to understand that in order to do that, my loyalty has to be 100% with working people and 0 with big business.
Rebellion is in the air all over the world, and that's what scares the powers that be the most. And so they know that this is going to happen, and they've been preparing for it for a long time. And they know that their neglect, of doing something about climate change and what's happened to the economy in the United States, that sooner or later there's going to be rebellion, And so that's why they're spying on everybody. That's why that, they're the whole apparatus of repression is being put into place, right? And so, we have that in the city because the police are under a federal court order. The mayor, happened to agree with him on a lot of things, but where his downfall is that, he's afraid of the police, and everybody's afraid of the police and the police guild in the city council. And so why is that? And what can you do if you got elected?
Well, again, yeah, that is true. I mean, everybody's afraid of the police, and the question of police brutality and the systematic targeting of people of color and activists is very, very key. In fact, I know personally, from being in the Occupy movement, how the movement was targeted systematically by the police. But, we cannot understand what the police are doing and their actions without seeing who they are taking their orders from. The police don't function independently. They are taking their orders from the mayor's office. They are taking their orders from the city government, and
Federal government.
And the federal government, of course. Yes, I mean this is happening on, not on. It's not. This is not because you have a few bad cops. This is happening because there is a systematic oppression of people who speak out. Yes, you have the way the Occupy movement was targeted, the way activists have been targeted historically. You look at the stop and frisk law in New York City, and I was recently in New York City, and I was stunned to see these NYPD watchtowers near the projects, near where low-income people of color live. And it's absolutely horrendous. But it's no different in Seattle. You don't have to go to New York to see what's happening. Look at what's happening in Seattle. Look at what's happening in South Seattle. And I know that the mayor's new budget talks about, the biggest funding is for, from the general fund is for expanding, police coverage. And the claim from them is that, people are asking for more police. And they've clearly not gone to people of color neighborhoods and asked them if they want more police. They clearly don't, because the police are the ones that are oppressing them. And but it's a complex issue in the sense that, of course, there is crime that's happening. I mean, my car was broken into recently, and for working people, that presents a huge expense. When you're living from paycheck to paycheck, a small thing like that can set you back. People I know have been mugged, and they've had to be hospitalized, for minor injuries. But the reason these things are happening is precisely because of the economic deterioration of that people are facing. People are facing unemployment. People are being marginalized, and even more importantly, the vast majority of victims of crime are working people. It's low-income people, people of color, poor people, middle-class people. They're the ones who are facing the brunt of crime as well. So the way to solve these situations is to actually deal with inequality and poverty head-on. And that is the first step we need to take. And I don't see anybody in city government right now being willing to do that. You also have to have, elected representatives who will actually fight for people of color. When I can't remember, I'm thinking about it, and I can't offhand remember any instance of anybody who is in city government right now who has actually spoken out strongly against police brutality and targeting of people of color and proposed any kind of solution. I mean, one of the things we need urgently is to change who is the SPD, the Seattle police. Who are they accountable to? Officially, they are accountable to the mayor and the city government. What we want is for the Seattle police to be accountable to us, people. So we need to change that in the first place. The SPD has to be accountable to a democratically elected civilian oversight committee that will have full hiring, firing, and subpoena powers over the SPD. They have to be accountable to us, and if they behave in an oppressive manner, then they have to face the consequences. We don't have that situation right now. The police are doing what they're doing with impunity, and that's because the problem is not just with the police, the problem is with who they take their orders from. And that's where we need to talk about. I mean, it's easy for the mayor to talk about these things, but it was the mayor who allowed who ordered the police against Occupy. An 80-year-old activist, Dorley Rainey, was pepper sprayed by the police. And so regardless of, whether it was the mayor or the police, ultimately the mayor does have jurisdiction on them, and there's nothing stopping him from speaking out. It's not just about him, it's the way the city government is run. Nothing stopping them from speaking out against police brutality, but I don't hear them speaking out about it. I don't hear them proposing solutions to make the Seattle police accountable to people in general, so that people who are the most affected have the voice on that. So I think it's a really interesting, Dorley Rainey's example, because she is an 80-year-old activist. It's amazing woman, it's a complete inspiration for all of us. I feel humbled by the energy and the enthusiasm that she still has. And she's been a long-time activist. And when she was pepper sprayed by the Seattle police on a nonviolent, march as part of Occupy, that photo went viral globally, because it was really an evocative symbol of the kind of oppression people and activists face from police forces, from the military, and it's worse in other countries, obviously. But it shows you that, it helps you to understand the systemic reasons behind why this happens. It's not that, police officers personally are evil. That's not the question. The question is, the thing to understand is that the police force, the military, and allied organs, they are tools of repression that are used by governments, that are trying to uphold capitalism. They're trying to maintain stability, and their idea of stability is to make protest voices go away. Because the more that people agree with the people who are protesting, the more the movement grows, and the more there is a question about, well, is this a system we want to have? Shouldn't we challenge it? And that challenge to the system is what is a threat to the governments and to the capitalist class in general. And that is why sometimes this kind of force is used, where something ridiculous like an 80-year-old woman, what threat does she represent? But she was pepper sprayed. But it has the flip side of that is that when they do that kind of overreach, it actually builds the movement, because it creates outrage in the minds of people, and people feel that's just wrong. And a lot of people who are not part of the movement to begin with will become part of the movement, because it's their outrage against that kind of police action that brings them forward. I don't know if you remember, but in the more early days of Occupy Wall Street, the police there in New York, they did this thing called kettling of young women activists, and they pepper sprayed them. And that video, it was captured on video and on a phone video or something, and that video also went viral, and it really showed in a stark manner to people that these forces are actually doing the bidding of an oppressive government, and they're not on our side, and we need to actually have nonviolent actions against that as well, and really build larger movements. And Dorley, I think she said to the mayor that this is shameful what has happened, and I think a lot of people will agree. A lot of people, and you don't have to be socialist to agree that was an absolutely disgusting act that happened, and we should remember it. I'm glad you asked about it, because we should remember it, to keep in mind that we have to have police and other organs of the government accountable to us as citizens. Not they shouldn't be held accountable to the wealthy, because the wealthy have interests that are contrary to our interests.
You are an economist, and there's nobody else on the city council that has that kind of background. And Obama ran as the person who was for change and everything, and then he appointed, these people from Goldman Sachs, who were, Larry Summers and Geithner and all these people, who were economists because they were experts, right? But do you actually feel, to be in a position of power that you have to have some kind of special training?
Well, if you want to do what if you want to uphold the interests of the wealthy and the CEOs and the bosses, then I think that is an absolute requirement, because that is a business education or an economics education will actually help you with that. But what a business education or an economics degree does for you is not so much that it teaches you the technical stuff, which anybody could learn. I mean, it's not something that only a few people can do. Anybody could understand what I understand. You just have to spend that time studying it. What going to an economics program or a business program in graduate school does for you is that it ideologically transforms you. If you weren't already, it ideologically, you align yourself with the interests of billionaires and the capitalist class. And what Larry Summers brings to the Obama administration is not his knowledge of economics. There's any number of economists, including myself, who have the same knowledge he has. What he brings is his ideological conviction to represent the interests of hedge fund owners, derivative, investors, venture capitalists. That is why this financial collapse happened, because people like Larry Summers provide the intellectual legitimacy that is necessary to carry out this global scale highway robbery, which is what the financial collapse actually was. And so what you need, if you want, but on the other hand, if you want to fight for working people and fight for economic justice, then you don't need any kind of degree. What you need is a political will and character to stand against big business and to stand with working people. And more than that, what you need is an organization, a grassroots, democratically organized body, of people that will hold you accountable. So what keeps me accountable, what will keep me accountable as a city council is not just my political and moral clarity, which of course is the first step, but the fact that I am democratically held accountable to the people who put me in office. And if the people who are in office don't fulfill your needs, you have to vote them out. And that is exactly what we need in the city council. We have a city council full of people who are representing big business. It's not working for us. Show them the door and put grassroots voices in office.
Thank you for your time.